Welcome back to Broxhammer, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about Howling Banshees and why them and other combat units from the Craftworld Eldar might be in trouble when 10th edition drops. So I recently looked at the new Terminator datasheet that was revealed by GW in 10th edition, and I have to say Terminators are looking a lot scarier. Not only do they have an increased invulnerable save from a 5+ to a 4+ on the basic Terminators, but they also have an increased toughness, their toughness going from 4 to 5. So both of those changes are getting me thinking that units like Howling Banshees that are very specialized combat units might actually have trouble adapting to the types of heavier units that the game is going to introduce in 10th edition. So I wanted to do a video analyzing this and kind of talking about it a little bit and talking about why Howling Banshees in particular might actually face an uphill battle when battling different units that they were previously pretty good against. So before we start today's video, I do want to do a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today in the video. We're going to be doing a brief explanation of the role Howling Banshees play in a Craftworld Eldar army, and we're going to be talking about what they have been historically good against. We're going to be looking at the new Terminator datasheet and what it means for Howling Banshees and other combat units. And lastly, we're going to be looking at what conclusions might be drawn from the massive buff to the Terminator survivability. So let's go ahead and first dive right into the explanation of what role Howling Banshees play now and have played in the past. So Howling Banshees have always been a unit that is really good at killing heavily armored infantry. Now this type of armored infantry has changed from edition to edition. Back in 4th edition, they were really good at killing Terminators, and then in 5th edition, they were really bad at killing Terminators. But we're still pretty solid at killing heavy infantry like regular Space Marines. Their best targets have usually been either units with a very poor invulnerable save, a 5+ or a 6+, or no invulnerable save at all, and that's because their weapons have a high AP value. In the past, their weapons have ranged from, being able to take out Marine-style targets, mech equivalents, and even up to Terminator equivalents. And in this edition, they happen to also be very good at killing certain vehicles. So what I mean by this is when Howling Banshees charge in, they get strength 4, right? And they get a +1 to wound. So that means that against toughness 7 vehicles, they'd be wounding on a 4+ with AP -4. Now you stack Doom on that, and you have a unit that is basically supposed to kill heavy infantry, but is actually very good at killing tanks now. Especially if the Exarch has the Piercing Strike's Exarch power. And it's currently one of the best in-slot units in the entire Eldar Codex. You will rarely see a tournament list or a very competitive list without at least one unit of Howling Banshees, just for the amount of raw damage that they can deal to multiple types of targets, and for their utility via the Banshee Mask, which of course gets rid of Overwatch and also Set to Defend. In addition to making the enemy unit strike last, which is extremely useful with the Counter-Strike stratagem being a popular choice to disrupting your turn or your charge order, stuff like that. So Howling Banshees, pretty good, right? They're in a very good spot this edition, and they've really shined throughout the edition despite a small points hike and other things. They have really stuck hard and stuck fast and are a really popular unit as well. Now, that looks to be changing in 10th edition. Now, here's the reason why. Let's go ahead and take a look at the new Terminator datasheet for 10th edition that was revealed a couple of days ago. So when we look at this datasheet, the first thing that pops out to me is the toughness 5. So Terminators have historically had toughness 4, with the exception of some Chaos Terminators like Nurgle Terminators, for example, and this increase in toughness makes them more durable against anti-infantry fire. So beforehand, Terminators were very tough, but typically if you fired enough shots at them at strength 4, they would still fail saves, especially if those shots had a good AP value. For example, Shuriken Catapults often did a good amount of damage for their points cost against Terminator units. The second thing that I've noticed about this is the fact that they have a 4+ invulnerable save now. So These guys obviously do not have storm shields, so this invulnerable save is their base invulnerable save. We don't know what storm shields do yet. In my opinion, they're probably not going to give a 3+ invulnerable save, but they may give a bonus to their save just like they do now, and they might give a couple of other bonuses. We'll just have to wait and see on that. They also have a teleport homer, which basically makes a stratagem that you can use, which I guess is one of the basic stratagems you can use in the rulebook now, which I'll probably go over later on. Really, it's basically just a stratagem that allows you to deep strike in the enemy's turn, in their movement phase. This is not always going to be helpful, as if you deep strike in the enemy's movement phase, they can pretty much have the chance to kill you in their shooting, right? So it's not always going to be helpful, and you do have to teleport within 3 inches of a teleport homer marker, so that's not quite that helpful. However, they do also have the Fury of the First. So basically they can ignore hit modifiers the first time they make an attack, which is pretty good. In essence, you have a unit that has increased toughness in the form of an invulnerable save and toughness value. And even though their rapid fire weapons are slightly worse via the Stormbolter, doesn't have as much shots as it used to have, you are ignoring hit modifiers the first time you make attacks. So already that's pretty good against Eldar, especially things like Howling Banshees, because Howling Banshees currently have a -1 to hit modifier. So this kind of confirms that hit modifiers will still be in the game to a certain degree. And I'm sure Eldar units will have their fair share of these, being, Eldar. So what are the key takeaways from this new datasheet? So I think the increased toughness means that low to average strength anti-infantry weapons, so strength 4 weapons and strength 5 weapons, are going to be less effective. So this means Howling Banshees and Striking Scorpions, as they stand now, of course their rules could change as well, but as they stand now, if nothing changes much in their datasheets, their combat attacks will be much less effective against Terminators. And because GW basically also confirmed that the wound chart is going to remain largely unchanged, I think it's safe to say that Howling Banshees and Striking Scorpions are going to have a much harder time wounding Terminator models with both their shooting and combat attacks. The better invul save also means that high AP weapons are going to be less effective. So think about Storm Shield and Thunderhammer Terminators. Banshees aren't exactly the best target against those. And now, with the 4+ invulnerable save, they're going to be even less effective against regular Terminators as well. Which is actually a really hard blow, because Banshees were typically one of those units who could go toe-to-toe, point for point, with Terminators, with buffs, of course, right? Things like Guide, things like Doom could really spell a nasty end to a unit of Terminators. But now it's looking like, with those buffs the Terminators got, Howling Banshees are going to have a much harder chance of actually punching their weight against them. And essentially, if we break down the math, now my math may not be perfect here, but if everything remains the same with Howling Banshees as it does now, which I assume it kind of will to a much larger extent, they will be about 33% less effective against Terminators. Now, there are some things in the rules which suggest that some weapons might get the anti-infantry keyword. And this keyword is basically going to function kind of like poison, right? So basically how it's going to work is that against the keyword target, so for example, if Banshees somehow get this keyword, they will never need worse than a 4+ to wound, which will give them a quote-unquote critical wound, right? So kind of like poison, how it works now. And the thing is, that's pretty good, but I don't know if Howling Banshees are going to get that. I think the anti-infantry keyword is going to be saved for poison-type units like Dark Eldar weapons and things like that. I don't really think it's going to apply to Howling Banshees, but we'll just have to wait and see. And so far, it also looks like mortal wounds are either greatly reduced in power or absent from the 10th edition rulebook altogether. And this isn't confirmed yet. We don't really have confirmation on this, but I think one of the main things that GW wants to step away from in the next edition is mortal wounds. And if they are still in the game, I think they're going to be much reduced. I think they're going to be much more scarce in the game and reserved for units like Psychers and other powerful characters. I don't think they're going to be on regular units, which means that units like Striking Scorpions might have a change in their Manda Blaster special rule. But again, this is not confirmed, so don't quote me on this or anything like that. I just think that that's maybe the direction GW is going with Mortal Wounds. And also, other Eldar combat units will most likely be much less effective as well against Terminator-style units. So Shining Spears, they have a great strength on the charge, so they won't really be as affected by the toughness, but they will be affected by the increased invulnerable save. So that is also something to consider. So considering all that, what conclusions might be drawn from the massive buff to Terminator survivability? So I think that there's a couple of things we can look at here. Now, I think the new stats could come with a hefty price point increase, making Terminators a much higher value unit. Of course, hence the buffs to make them feel more elite. I think one of the things GW wants to do when they release this edition is make Terminators feel really elite, hard-hitting, and also very durable. They want to make Space Marine players feel like their Terminators are actually unstoppable Dreadnought armor units, like they're supposed to be, right? Instead of units that are kind of just easy to kill. Now, that's kind of how Terminators are for the most part now, unless you give them the Storm Shield and Thunderhammer. They die rather easily to things like Howling Banshees. And I think GW wanted to change that and make them feel a little bit more durable. However, I think that this might also come with a points increase. We'll just have to see. We haven't seen the points yet, so we can't speculate on that yet. The other thing I think is that as a result, units like Howling Banshees might have a much more specialized role, and we will probably have to look elsewhere in the Codex for good Terminator counters. So even Shining Spears look to be less effective against Terminators than they are now. And just based on their data sheet and everything, I think scatter lasers might be a good option, but we don't know what happens to scatter lasers yet either. Hopefully they retain the same number of shots and everything like that, but we don't know what's going to be effective and what's not without actually looking at the stats and weapon special rules. So one thing I will say though is that despite the fact that Banshees look to be a lot worse against Terminators coming 10th edition, I still think Howling Banshees are going to be a pretty good unit. The reason why is because Howling Banshees are still good against a lot of other stuff out there, right? Even though Terminators are getting a 4+ invulnerable save, that doesn't mean Howling Banshees aren't going to be good at killing targets that are non-Terminator models. So against everything with a 5+ invulnerable save or worse, or even no invulnerable save, I think they're still going to be very good. But we all will see in due time. Now, one thing I did also want to mention, kind of as a side thing, is that if Terminators are getting toughness 5, that's regular Terminators, you can expect Chaos Terminators of different flavors, Nurgle Terminators, Thousand Suns Terminators, to be even tougher. So Nurgle Terminators are probably going to be looking at toughness 6 on par with a Wraithguard or Wraithblade, and you're probably going to see, Thousand Suns Terminators getting a better invul save or something like that. So I can definitely see Terminators of all flavors being an extremely hard unit to take out, especially in Chaos armies where Terminators have buffs that give them even more survivability. So that's going to be tough to deal with as well. And as for other big units like Wraithguard or Wraithblades, I don't know if they're going to be getting the equivalent buffs. We'll just have to wait and see. I think they should, to be honest. I think if Terminators are getting a buff like that, I think Wraithguard and Wraithblade should get an equivalent buff of some kind. Maybe a 2+ save instead of a 3+ save, or maybe just an inbuilt, feel no pain type of thing. Who knows? I do think they should be getting a buff as well, though. Okay, so in conclusion, I think the new Terminator reveal shows us that GW is putting in serious effort to differentiate the durability between Terminators and other infantry. And my guess is that unless they also up the damage of Howling Banshees, which again, I really don't see them doing, to be honest. I see, if anything, Howling Banshees armor penetration being reduced. They will become a lot more specialized in the types of units they're actually effective against. Or, at the very least, they will need help with Terminator equivalent units. Now, something else I was also thinking about is that if Terminators do get a points increase, Banshees are still going to be effective against them point for point, which means that you might see people starting to take Howling Banshees and other units like that in greater numbers to be able to deal with those Terminator units. So minimum squads of Howling Banshees might no longer be the meta choice for most players. We might actually see a shift in the amount of models people are taking in an effort to deal with these super tough units. And I could definitely see people taking a lot more Banshees and basically loading them up with buffs to be able to deal with Terminators. Because yeah, Terminators are going to be 33% more survivable against Howling Banshees. But if you load a big squad up with Guide and Doom and things like that, they're still going to die, right? The increased invul save and the increased toughness is going to help, but it's not going to be able to completely overcome a huge unit buffed with things like Guide and Doom and maybe even Jinx if we still have it. So I think that's also something we are likely to see, that if Terminators and their equivalents are much tougher in the game, we might actually see players taking just more models in an effort to compensate for that increased toughness. And again, Eldar units are really great with buffs. You take a big unit of Howling Banshees, you load them up with things like Guide and Doom, and they're pretty much going to be unstoppable. And a large part of the reason people don't do that currently is because there's not really many units in the game that are tough enough to warrant that. So when people are considering taking all-comers lists and things like that, they're considering the types of units they might come across. You know, not a lot of units are going to be showing up on the Howling Banshees radar that they can't already take out. And to be honest with you guys, until recently in Arcs of Omen, we really didn't see players taking a lot of Terminators because they just weren't that cost effective for their toughness. And now since their price has been reduced, we've seen a huge resurgence of players using Terminators, especially the Thunderhammer and Stormshield variants, which are now a very common sight across several armies, including Iron Hands and of course Dark Angels, which we all know and probably equally hate. And speaking of, my first escalation game versus Dark Angels actually went very well. I wanted to just tell you guys that I have been working on the battle report, so I will kind of have that out by the end of the week. But yeah, basically I did very well in the game. I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll kind of show you in the battle report what my strategy was going into it, what objectives I picked and things like that, and how I was able to kind of use the board to my advantage to overcome a disadvantage in, you know, relative toughness and things like that. So I will have that video out by the end of the week. And yeah, other than that, I just wanted to share with you guys my quick thoughts and speculations about Howling Banshees in 10th edition and how I think they're going to fare against the new Terminators. I will have updates for you guys as they come in, as more reveals are, you know, announced by GW. I will go ahead and make videos on them and, you know, kind of make posts on them as they come for you guys, so you guys can kind of, you know my thoughts about, you know, the certain reveals and how they will affect the Craftworld Eldar going forward, at least as far as the information provided by GW can give us. All right, everybody, thanks for watching this video. I know a lot of it was speculation, but I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one, everybody. My Patreon and PayPal links are in the description. Thank you for all of those who have helped me so far and supported the channel. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much once again, and I'll see you guys later. Have a good one. If you guys have any speculations of your own about 10th edition, or want to put in your own thoughts about what you think the increase in Terminator durability means for the Craftworld Eldar, I would be more than happy to see it in the comment section and have a discussion on it. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out, and see you guys later. Have a good one, everybody.